In this video, you're going to start to set up your local machine to work with Prisma. There are a few tools we're going to be installing and configuring to get everything up and running, and then we'll actually be able to learn how this tool works with our GraphQL application. Now, the catch here is that the process for installing and setting all of this up is a little different for each operating system, so I've actually created 3 separate installation videos. This video shows you how to set everything up for Mac. The next video shows you how to set up everything for Windows, and the video after that shows you how to set everything up for Ubuntu. You do not need to watch all 3, just pick the installation video for the operating system you're currently working on. All right, if you're still watching this video, I am going to assume you're using a Mac, so let's go ahead and get things set up. The first thing I'd like to do is get us set up with a database, and the database we're going to be using is Postgres. Postgres is an SQL database, and it pairs really well with GraphQL. SQL databases in general pair really well with GraphQL, because with GraphQL, you have to be explicit about the exact fields and type definitions for those fields, making it an easy match. Later on in the course, I will show you how to set up Prisma with MongoDB if that's your cup of tea. Honestly, any database you can pick works, because in the end of the day, Prisma abstracts that database away anyways. For now though, let's go ahead and grab Postgres, heading over to Heroku.com. Now, there are plenty of places where you can get a Postgres database, and you do not have to use Heroku. I use Heroku because they have a free tier for what we're about to do, so you actually don't need to pay in order to get a basic database up and running for your sample application. So take a moment to log in if you have an account and sign up if you don't. I'm going to go ahead and log into my existing account, and once we're in, we should see a dashboard. Now, if you're creating your new account, it's likely going to send you through some new customer flow where it asks you to create an app, and that's good because it's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to create a new application, and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to start with my last name in all lowercase letters. Now, there's no spaces allowed, so I will use hyphens to separate my words. That is Mead-Prisma-Dev Server. Awesome. Now, we don't need to touch the region. You likely have a default region good for your location around the world. You could customize it to Europe if you wanted to, but since I am in the US, I'll stick with that. And I'm not going to touch the pipeline at all. All we're going to do is create the application, and once the application is created, it's going to bring us to a set of steps describing how we can start to deploy things. Now, there are plenty of features for Heroku that we're actually not going to need in this class. We really only need a very small subset of them, and we can get started by heading to the Overview tab for our application. What we're concerned about is installing add-ons. There's one for a Postgres database, so let's head over to the Configure Add-ons page, and from here we can search all of the available add-ons. You want to search for Heroku Postgres. Now, there is a free tier for that, so once we click on Heroku Postgres, it's going to allow us to pick the option we want, everything from free to $12,000 a month. Let's go ahead and start with that free plan. I am going to provision this, which is going to create the database, and once the database is created, we're going to be able to click that in our add-ons list. It's going to bring us over to the page where we can learn a little bit more about our database. One important thing we need from here are the credentials that allow us to connect to this database. You can find those over in the Settings tab. Right here, we have the database credentials area, and we can view our credentials. This is the information that we're going to need to connect to this newly created database from the outside world. Now, if you're seeing credentials for your database, you're all done with Heroku. We're not going to be using any other features of it. We're just here for the database, and if we have our credentials, then we're all set. The database is created, and we can now connect to it. The next tool that we're going to install is called pgadmin, and that's going to allow us to manage our Postgres database via a GUI. So we're going to be able to view our data, making changes to it like it was in an Excel file without needing to use code to interact with the database. Of course, our code is going to interact with the database, but a GUI is nice to see what data you're working with and how data is changing over time. You can find the GUI that we're going to be using by Googling pgadmin. pgadmin is probably the most popular one out there. It might not be the sleekest looking tool, but it does get the job done. It's super stable. If you head over to pgadmin.org, we can download the version necessary for us for Mac users. Now, pgadmin is available for pretty much everything out there, which is why it's a great choice. We're going to grab the Mac-specific one. Right here, just grabbing whatever the latest version is. You don't need to match up your version with my version. It's perfectly fine to just use the latest stable release. Right here, we have the DMG file. That is what we need. I'm going to click that, and it is going to start the installation down below. Perfect. Now, the installer for pgadmin is one of those click next installers. You don't have to do anything fancy. You're not running any commands from the command prompt. All you're doing is cracking it open, clicking next, and giving permission for it to install something on your machine. Now, I already have pgadmin installed, so all you need to do is wait for the download to complete, run through the installation, and then once it's installed, go ahead and crack it open. You should be able to find it in your Applications folder. So I have my Finder right here. If I head over to Applications and go down to P, right here I have pgadmin 4. All I'm going to do is click that. It is going to start up pgadmin, and in the end of the day, what it's going to do is open up a new browser tab. So take some time to pause the video until you've gotten everything installed. When you're seeing the pgadmin tab in your browser, like I'm seeing here, you can go ahead and come back and follow along. All right, I'm going to assume at this point you are seeing what I'm seeing. All we're going to do is add a new server. This is going to allow us to set up the connection to the database that we just created. And I'm going to match up the name here with the name I picked for my Heroku app. That was mead-prisma-dev-server. It does not need to match up. I'm just matching it up because that's logical. It's going to make it easy to find this server. From here, we have to move over to the connection tab. And this is where we put in all of the connection details that Heroku spit out. We're going to start with the host. You can find the host right here. We have to copy that value and paste it over. Then after that, what do we have? Well, we have our database. This is the actual database that's been given to us. So I'm going to grab that and bring that over as well, right here to the maintenance database tab. Then we have user and password. We have to grab both of those as well. We have user right here. I'm going to paste that in the username field. And then down below, we have password, the last field we need. We can bring that over as well. And I am going to check that save password checkbox. I don't want to have to enter the password every single time I want to connect from pgadmin. Now we can actually save the connection. From here, we should be able to expand the new connection we've just created and go under databases. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky. What you see here is every single database on this shared cluster, so it's not just yours. Now, just because I can see them all listed doesn't mean I can actually access them. If I try to expand one of these databases, you can see I get an error saying permission denied. So there are a lot of databases listed here, but in reality, only one of them is the database we can actually use out of 2,000 databases. To easily find it, all I do is I just grab the database name over here, copy it to the clipboard, use Find On Page in the browser to search for that database by name, and here it is. And you can see that this one does not have that little X next to it. That's because this is a database we can actually connect to. If I expand it, you can see we have a few different options under here, and for the moment, we're actually going to ignore all of these. We'll talk a bit more about why pgadmin is a useful tool once we get Prisma set up and we are actually working with some data. So for now, we have our Heroku database set up and we have a way to connect to it from a GUI. This is a great first step. The next thing we're going to do before we actually install Prisma is to go ahead and install a tool called Docker. So we can find this by heading over to docker.com. This is a dependency. It's something that we have to have installed on our machines in order to use Prisma. If you've never used or worked with Docker before, that's perfectly fine. We're going to be using a very small amount of Docker in this class. Docker can be a complex tool in the whole DevOps space, and there are literally entire Udemy courses that just cover Docker. We don't need to worry about all of that. We're using a very, very small subset of its features. Now, what is Docker? Well, it's part of this whole containerization and virtual machine movement. So if I'm building up an application, I have my application code and I have my dependencies. Let's say I need to run on Linux and I also need Git and Node.js installed. Now I have a couple of options. I could choose to allow people who want to run the application to actually install all of those things. Then I could cross my fingers and hope it works on their environment, or I can bundle it all up into a container. The container, which in essence is a little virtual machine, can then be executed from anywhere Docker is supported, and the good news is that Docker is supported pretty much everywhere. Whether it's Mac, Linux, or Windows, you can run Docker containers regardless of what tools or dependencies they need. You don't have to slow down and install a whole bunch of stuff on your machine for every application. Instead, you just run the container. It's very easy to stop containers, to delete them, and to free up all of that space without trying to remember all of the dependencies you had to install. It's just a better way to manage apps. Now, there are two sides to Docker. There is the person creating the application and creating the container, and there's the person who's using the container to run the application. That's the side we're on. So we're not going to learn about the ins and outs of Docker, because in reality, we're just a user of Docker trying to run a container provided by somebody else. Now, we're here just to install it. We can find the installation stuff over at docker.com/get-docker. And there are versions available for all operating systems. We're going to be using the free community edition. We do have to head over to what's called the Docker store. Don't worry, you don't actually check out or buy anything. It's totally free. Right here, we have versions for all operating systems and setups. We're going to be using the version for Mac. And once we're here, you are going to have to log in. So you're not going to see the Get Docker button. You're going to see a button saying you need to log in. What you'll have to do is create an account and then verify your email. That'll bring you back to this page, and you'll actually be able to click Get Docker to download the tool. Now, once the tool is downloaded, it's one of those click next installers. So take some time to actually go through the process of installing Docker. Obviously, you have to wait for it to finish downloading. And then when you have it installed, you can come back and click play. All right, at this point, I am going to assume that you have Docker installed. Once you have it installed, all you have to do is open it up in your Finder. So I'm going to go over to my applications folder. I'm going to go down to D. I have Docker sitting right here, and I'm going to double click it. Now, when we click Docker and we actually open it up, we're not going to see anything visually on our machine, though it did indeed start the Docker process. You should be able to view that up in your menu bar. You should see this little half whale with the little containers on it. And if you actually click that, you can get the status of Docker. Now, the first time you start it, it's going to say something like Docker is starting up with a little orange icon right here. It'll take anywhere from 20 seconds to a minute to actually get it started up. You just want to wait until you see Docker is running. If you're seeing Docker is running, then you're all done with this video. You have a Postgres database. You have pgadmin set up, and you have Docker up and running, which means that you have everything installed necessary to use Prisma. Now remember, the next two videos are installation videos for my Windows and for my Linux users. You can skip both of those and move on to the video after those. That's where we're actually going to start the process of installing and running our very first Prisma application. I am beyond excited to get to it, so let's go ahead and jump right in.